Hall & Wilcox acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands on which this podcast is recorded. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nations people joining us today.
Hello and welcome to our latest Doing Business in Australia podcast. At Hall & Wilcox, we work with both Australian and international clients, and we support our clients with all their global opportunities. We have experts at the firm who do cross-border work with connections with many jurisdictions outside Australia, and that includes the UK, Europe, China, Southeast Asia, and the US. My name's Chris Brown. I'm a partner in the corporate and commercial section at Hall & Wilcox in Sydney, and I'm the head of the firm's UK desk. I'm delighted to be the host of this episode, where, as ever, we'll be shining a spotlight on UK firms doing or looking to do business in Australia. To join me in discussion today is Nigel Clark. Now, by the time that we actually get this podcast up on the usual platforms, wherever you listen to your podcasts, we're hoping that Nigel will have been announced as our global relations consultant working out of the UK. I've personally known Nigel for the best part of 20 years. In fact, we were made partners at the same time at my previous law firm, but since that time, our paths have diverged, which I'll come on to explain in a minute. After his appointment as a partner at Minter Ellison, there we go, I mentioned the name of the firm, Nigel was head of the Minter's London office for a number of years, followed by senior management roles in the Hong Kong and Beijing offices. And I can say that his knowledge of how Aussie law firms do business in other jurisdictions is absolutely peerless. Following his return to the UK about a decade ago, Nigel founded Peregrine Law, which subsequently became part of Nexa, one of the UK's largest and most successful decentralised law firms. Nigel remains involved in Nexa, but has retained a strong interest in and connection with Australia through his directorship role with ASX-listed Collins Foods. It was on one of Nigel's trips back to Australia last year that my partner, Oliver Jankowski, and I first started talking to Nigel about maybe helping us with our outreach efforts to UK law firms and others. And that's where we're going to talk about today, amongst other things. So, Nigel, welcome. Have I accurately summarised the last decade or so up to the present time? And what have you been up to since we were last in partnership together?
Yeah, hi, Chris, and thanks for that. Yes, that was pretty good. I might have to ask you to write my CV, I think, in future. That was not bad at all. So, yes, I've had a deep love affair with all things Australian. I think my parents did a stint in Australia in the mid 80s, and I was actually at a boarding school in the UK and used to come out for school holidays. I'm a sport lover. I love the outdoors. I fell in love with Australia, and then I think I started my career in London, but I think that subconsciously I was looking for an excuse to work in and then with Australia, and I've been very fortunate for the best part of 25 years now to work on what I call the UK Australian axis, with a bit of Europe and Asia obviously within that as well. So and I think you and I worked very closely together, and I was at Minter Ellison for almost 14 years. I left 10 years ago, came back to the UK, and as you said, I describe it as building a startup. I started a new law firm. It's interesting that you call Peregrine and Nexa decentralized law firms. There is no right vernacular, I don't think. There's never been a really brilliant marketer that's called it. I call them a consultancy platform. So it's effectively a different way of running a law firm. And that's what we've done. It was quite domesticated. The UK market, plenty big enough for us to build that business. And I realized that I missed working with Australia, and so that's what over the last couple of years I've started to dust off my connections and start doing more business in Australia, and I've been fortunate to pick up a couple of opportunities, one of which of course is with Hall & Wilcox.
Excellent. So, as you know, I'm really excited that we've got, and we're all really excited that we've got a proven business developer and marketing tour de force working with us, but perhaps you can explain what a global relations consultant is and what you'll be doing.
Yes, I'm not sure I can describe what it is, because I'm not sure it is something other than what I'll be doing. I did use an AI tool to ask AI what a global relations consultant does, but you and I have talked at length about this. I've always thought that there are very big opportunities for law firms in different markets out around the world to build relationships with ultimately clients, investors, other advisors, whereby to help join the dots, the globalization, albeit that I think that we probably won't have time to get onto it today, that it worries me that there's a bit of a retreat away from globalization at the moment. But there are I believe there is a lot of opportunity for countries and everybody within countries, people, businesses, etc., governments, to work together across borders. And part of my role for Hall & Wilcox, I think, will be to empower Hall & Wilcox to have more confidence about selling themselves and putting themselves in a really good position to pick up investment coming into Australia, and also help Hall & Wilcox clients going outside Australia, and to remind people. I know that the firm has already got entrenched relationships, really strong relationships in the UK and in other major markets around the world. Help build on, develop those relationships, to give prospective clients, law firms and other advisors the best possible service, I think, for want of a better description. And for me, what will the role entail for me? The London legal market is huge. And there's several hundred years of history of London and the UK trading with other parts of the world. And English law as an export is one of the UK's more successful exports. And you only have to sort of look at the percentage. I think it's somewhere over 85% of the world's cross-border legal contracts are either governed by English law or New York law, probably Delaware law now. So that it's important. And so there are a lot of players, what I would call players in the London market, that work on global cross-border investment work. And I want to help Hall & Wilcox get its fair share, or get its disproportionate share, punching above its weight, of picking up work that comes out of that market. And then obviously also build on what you've already got coming out of New York, or coming out of Dallas, or coming out of Singapore, Hong Kong, and that sort of stuff, and just joining the dots about your global strategy. And I think hopefully just do my little bit within that.
No, that's great. Thanks for that. Just to remind listeners, again, we've been told that these podcasts aren't about the hard sell, so I'm not going to perform a hard sell. But we are, I think, now the 10th largest law firm in Australia. We operate out of every major state and territory capital, and we're truly independent, an independent national Australian business law firm, which is full service in absolutely every material respect. So maybe I've set you up for the next question, Nigel, but why did you, apart from those reasons I've just given, why did you decide to hook up with Hall & Wilcox and not another brand or another firm which is perhaps better known in the UK market?
For me, what I've really enjoyed about getting to know Hall & Wilcox, and then looking at Hall & Wilcox from the other side of the world, and listening to people about Hall & Wilcox, is I think that there is an opportunity for Hall & Wilcox to really build brand and build an even bigger referral work stream, for want of a better description. Obviously, you and I have a friendship and a history, which is great. And then you've introduced me to a number of other senior management personnel within Hall & Wilcox, and I've really liked them, without exception. So for me, I will always be, I'm a people person. I want to work with people I like and respect. And I've really enjoyed meeting the Hall & Wilcox team. So there's a cultural piece that I really like. There's also, and this goes to why I like working with Australian businesses, but in particular with Hall & Wilcox, there's a drive, an ambition, a determination. And I've sort of looked from afar at Hall & Wilcox and thought, wow, these guys have done really, really well. I'm sorry, guys, I mean boys and girls, have done really, really well. They are determined to reflect in their culture and build what they say they're going to build. They've got a really powerful law firm, And if I'm honest, I think, without being disrespectful, I think there is an opportunity to shout from the rooftops a bit around the world about Hall and Wilcox. And I think Hall and Wilcox brand reputation in Australia is where it needs to be and should be, and it's reflected that you've got big scale and you're a national serious player, and it's possibly not as well known because of the lack of history as much as anything else, not as well known as some of the other law firms coming out of Australia. And I think there's an opportunity there for us. And I hopefully can add some value into that and help you with that. But for me, ultimately, Chris, the short answer is the people, the culture, and the ambition.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, I second that, and I think that's a good response, because that's certainly, one of the reasons a number of years ago why I joined the firm, and I've not regretted my decision at all. Hard sell again there for those who are producing this podcast. Let's just switch gears slightly, Nigel, and maybe we can just have a sort of back and forth discussion around, what do we think, based on our collective experience, the opportunities are for UK investors either looking to invest in or otherwise do business with Australia. And maybe, when we discuss this, it's not so much an education piece for the clients, for the investors, but more perhaps for the technicians, so the professional advisors, lawyers, and others that help them. What do we think the major modern investment themes are and trends coming into Australia?
I suspect that you might be better placed to answer that, so I'll flip this around in a second. But my take on this, going very high level for a minute before we sort of dive into some detail and some examples, is the world's in I'm going to call it a funny place for want of getting too serious on a podcast. Geopolitically, the world is very different, say, for when you and I feel as though from when you and I started working together 20 years ago. It feels a very different place. If I look at it with a UK lens, I'm not going to get political, but I think that the UK has managed to self-inflict some things that have not helped business at all. And Brexit is an obvious one. But there are also lots of other things going on in the Northern Hemisphere that are really affecting the way that people are doing business together across borders. And then if I look from an Australian perspective, just by virtue of geography and the rise of China, Australia and Southeast Asia and the fast growth economies there, Australia is incredibly well placed to take advantage of some things that are shifting, sort of tectonically shifting in the business world globally. And to start going down into a bit more detail, from a London and a UK perspective, and I look at things, I've been back here for the UK. I mean, we're both British, but I've been, most of my working life has been here, and probably most of your working life has now been in Australia. From a UK perspective, the UK, you could see it with our relationship with the US, but also not far behind with our relationship with Australia is old friends are very, very important right now. We have lost our European Union relationships, and there's this, they're sort of trying, and they damaged it. A lot of our European relationships have been damaged. So there's some work to be done to build back those trading relationships, I think. So the UK more than ever and London needs to retain its place in the world. And I'd say that's London specifically, particularly from a legal standpoint. And that doesn't mean that there are not other very important legal markets in the UK, but London specifically needs to keep itself relevant. So within that, I think the UK is working harder with its traditional historical ties, its close friendships. So then if you look at the Australian context, and I think similarly, actually, from an Australian perspective, and you might disagree and shout, please, if you do, Chris, but I think Australia also needs its friendships in other parts of the world, as it always has, needs to have people that understand its culture, business, help its businesses, state governments, etc., to business around the world, and the UK, I think, has got a real opportunity to be that. I think I see that from, we've had successive governments from different sides of sort of the political ideologies, but there is a theme that, from a UK perspective, that they really want to improve, empower, develop the relationships again, which I think they probably ignored a bit over the last 40 years, say, because we had the European Union. So I don't know whether you agree with that, but I think it's a really important time now for UK and Australian businesses to do more together. And I think there are really good opportunities.
That's all right, and correct. Again, like you, I think that what we're seeing on the world stage, whether it's in geopolitics or trading relations, the closing of one door, results potentially in the opening of one or other doors. So those geopolitics and trading directions are, I think, creating a bit of a tailwind, if you like, for traditional relationships. Let's not forget, and perhaps it was much heralded, and we've not seen a massive impact or results, but there is a free trade agreement between the UK and Australia, which I think not only would it deal with trade, but also trade and investment, and certainly there are opportunities now, and with certain markets and certain opportunities perhaps not being as open as they were, UK investors will open their eyes and open their minds to investment in Australia. But looking at sectors which may be of interest, I mean, clearly there's the traditional things that Australia is very well known for, so metals and minerals, energy resources. Again, through that sort of geopolitical lens, what we've been reading and hearing or seeing on the world stage in the last couple of weeks, with the export restrictions around rare earths coming out of China and the US response to that is very, very relevant. At risk of straying into politics, I think the Australian PM is literally, within the next 12 hours, going to be having his first meeting with Donald Trump, and no doubt, a strategic stockpile for rare earths mined in Australia will be, I think, probably at the front of everyone's mind during that meeting. But other things that I think will be of interest to UK investors include a lot of the leading edge technologies that are being developed in this part of the world. So I call them frontier technologies, necessity being the mother of invention. So climate tech, ag tech, and sort of mining technologies, energy transition technologies, particularly around solar, although clearly China has a bit of a monopoly in that space. But we down here face a number of adversities in terms of the climate, and have had to adapt our agricultural existence and the way that we operate those businesses and those activities to fit in with the essentially the lot that's been dealt to us. So there's a lot of technology down here. A lot of it is sponsored by the CSIRO, which is the government research body. And I think Wi-Fi was actually back in the day was an Australian innovation, and other technologies. So I think we do punch above our weight, and it's certainly something that UK investors should be aware of. Excuse me. Hey, just quickly, as we're sort of heading towards wrapping up this discussion, what would you say the biggest challenges are for UK companies looking to invest in Australia? Obviously the tyranny of distance and time zones are challenging but not insurmountable, and there's a sort of chicken and egg thing with needing to have the physical presence and the infrastructure in order to get traction. But if you don't have it, how do you get traction? That's an issue. But what else do you from your time working over here and from your time advising UK firms as a lawyer, and the time that you spend a foot in both camps, what do you think the major challenges are for investors? It could be legal issues or practical issues. What do you reckon?
In terms of legal and making sure that businesses not only choose the right legal advice and stuff, but also don't make the wrong assumptions about things. I think it's really important when you're looking to invest into Australia or to operate a business in Australia. Familiarity is really, really helpful. So the language and culture piece when you're doing business outside of your home jurisdiction, really, really important. So there's some great comfort and for a UK business to invest or to look to run an operation in Australia. The danger then, the challenge for me is being complacent about that and then just making assumptions that the Australian legal landscape or the tax landscape, whatever it is almost identical to the UK, because you and I know it's not. So I think making too many assumptions is dangerous, and that's where experience and picking out the things that really matter and understanding whether it's the people side, the tax side, the fact that it's a federal country that's completely different to the UK system. So there is some, it's sort of, to use the American political expressions, known unknowns and known knowns about what it is. And I think the challenge is early on is for a business, for a UK, if I look at it from a UK business wanting to invest in Australia, whatever that looks like, is to take their assumption of the common law system, the language, the culture, the finance is very similar, but then also surround themselves with the right advisors so they can look at what might be different. And you and I have talked about this recently and historically, the rules around foreign investment, the rules about looking after your workforce and how to get the people side right, the rules on tax, the rules on the state versus centralized government piece. There are some key things which will affect how you do business in Australia, which I think.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it was maybe slightly unfair question, seeing as I'm the practicing Australian lawyer. But just to pick up on a couple of themes there, I agree with you. If you're perhaps not so much starting from scratch in Australia, but you're making an acquisition, so you're doing an M&A, you're buying a business or a company, the process and the law supporting or underpinning that process is very similar, whether you're here in the UK or the US. So between here and the UK, it's a common law. In the case of M&A, contract-based system, and you will be familiar as an investor. But then it's the rules or the laws which can be an obstacle to that process, or which become business challenges afterwards. So you mentioned the foreign investment rules. We have this, again, don't want to be political, we have this sort of fairly opaque system whereby certain investments need to receive Treasurer or Foreign Investment Review Board approval. I think if you ask any lawyers who have a transactional practice since COVID, it has certainly become a lot more difficult, not necessarily onerous, but practically more difficult not to get those investment proposals through the authorities, but just the process and the time and the resources that are required. So, don't underestimate what's involved there. What would have been a formality before COVID is still in a lot of cases a formality, but it's sort of stretched slightly, and there's a little bit more pain involved. I mean, for instance, the national security overlay. Again, I think a number of jurisdictions around the world brought this in response to the seizing up of supply chains and the sort of defensive posture that they had to assume as a result of COVID. So the prospect of being called back in if down the track your investment proposal, which you didn't get approval for, is found to have a national security impact, that is actually forcing, not compelling, but sort of practically forcing a number of proponents of transactions to actually go and get further approval, whereas in the past it just wouldn't have been in contemplation. Nigel, just to sort of wrap this up, because we're sort of running out of time and reel. As someone who's practiced law in both Australia and in the UK, and no less a person who has actually set up their own law firm, so kudos for that. What's your assessment of the differences between the UK market for legal services and the Australian market?
They're pretty similar. I mean, I've worked, as you noted at the top, I've worked in Beijing, so I've been to somewhere that's completely different to both. Pretty similar. The UK market, by virtue of partly because of the English law piece that I described earlier, the UK market, legal market, is hugely wide and deep and pretty innovative. The Australian market is smaller. A key difference is it's state-based. You now have, like Hall & Wilcox, you have a lot of large national players. But it used to be, it wasn't that long ago, when you only had state-based players, because it was more like the US legal landscape in some respects, or at least historically. The quality of legal services, I think, in both jurisdictions, actually, I as you know, Chris, I'm a huge fan of the Australian service providers, the law firms. I think Australia's got some of the leading law firms in the world, and I'm without being salesy, I'm very excited to be working with one of those again. Absolutely fantastic. But certainly within legal, it's not the same in all industry sectors, but within legal, both the Australian and UK markets are quite outward looking. And in some countries and some legal systems around the world, just by virtue of maybe the fact that their systems are completely different and unique, they're very inward looking, and the lawyers might tend to be very academic and only understand what's happening within their own jurisdiction. Whereas certainly from the major markets in Australia and the UK, it's quite different. A waffly, similar but different answer for you again.
I mean, that's certainly how we practice at Hall & Wilcox. Listen, very conscious of time, but it would be remiss of me not to ask you this question, Nigel. I know you're a cricket fan, but two-part question. I think the first part's easy enough. Who will you be barracking for in the forthcoming Ashes series, England or Australia? And secondly, can we have your predictions, please, for the overall series test result?
Yeah, as you know, I'm a cricket fan, but I love all sport. And one of the benefits of working with and for Australians again is the first 5 minutes of any conversation, of a discussion where you can get into the sport. And I lived in Australia in the early 2000s, where it was quite difficult being a Pom. But then we won the Rugby World Cup, and then we won the Ashes finally in 2005 back in England. So it got a bit easier.
Will we see a repeat this time of that result?
No, sadly not. England have a half decent cricket team going down. They're actually in New Zealand already playing some cricket, but I can't see how. I just can't see how we win in Australia. In fact, it's very, very difficult for any team to win in Australia cricket. So I will go there and I will enjoy it. And I'm lucky enough to be going to Perth to watch the first test, because, better than going to Sydney and we're probably 3-0 down by then. But no, fantastic. A great opportunity. And I really hope that it also provides opportunity, as will the Olympics, as will the Rugby World Cup in 2027, the men's, and there's a women's Rugby World Cup as well. Create opportunities for people to do business in and around the sport. Culturally, very important for both countries.
Okay, well, let's finish on the high note there. Your prediction that the England cricket team is going to be trounced again in Australia, but the positives of all the other great sporting events, which will hopefully create some great trade and investment opportunities between the UK and Australia. Thanks everyone for listening today. Thank you, Nigel, for participating. It was great. As always, please get in touch with us if you have any questions, and you can find our details on our website, which is hallandwilcox.com.au, or connect with us on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's episode, then rate, review, or subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again.
This podcast is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should always obtain legal advice about your specific circumstances.